Okay, I am live. Awesome. Okay, so if you're back, we are here to talk about rosaries and chaplets and all that kind of stuff. You thought, oh, we talked about the rosary yesterday, and she went on and on and on about all the like geography and anatomy of the rosary, and um, it was a whole thing. And to talk about rosary, and it is a whole thing. But um, there was still more. So let's get to it. Okay. So just to review, this in the modern world is what's called a rosary. It is a string of beads that are strung together. They can be made out of almost any material. And the idea is that it helps you keep track as you say a certain number of prayers. This tends to work really like I think part of the reason why this has become a popular devotion is again, it's flexible. And also, like 15 minutes is like enough time that you really feel like you put some time in, but also it's enough time that like you're not sitting there all day. And if you want to sit there all day and you want to do what they call a holy hour, which means you're spending a whole day praying, a whole hour praying, because if you were going to mass every day, you would spend about an hour a day in prayer, is the idea. So it's like you can't go to mass, but you can still say the rosary. And if you can't say, all 200 or, um, all 200 or, um, 150 prayers, you can at least say a third of it. Because if you say all of those, you'll pray the whole thing, all the mysteries, all the way through in the week. Or if you're in Lent and you're going hard on the sorrowful mysteries, that's what'll do it for you. Okay, this extraordinarily beautiful rosary was a gift. Now, technically, though, the rosary, and keep in mind, rosaries are like basically unregulated. Anybody can make one out of anything they want, and they can take it to a priest to be blessed. The only way, like priests will never say no to that request. Although if you come up with something that's like a really non-standard design, they will have questions and you might have to explain it, but they'll be like, what is that? And you're like, oh, it's a, so like for example, if I made a more medieval style rosary, and I'll get into the history in a minute, where it was just a closed loop and there wasn't a cross on it or anything like that, my priest might ask me why. And I would explain, oh, like I decided I wanted to try praying the Dominican rosary on a loop because I read in a book that back in the day it didn't have the drop and I wanted to have something special. And that won't be a problem because it's basically non-regulated. The priest just wants to figure out if I'm like starting to get into like some kind of a practice that isn't healthy for me. But technically, the rosary is the prayers. The beads themselves are a variety of chaplet. A chaplet is, but generally it's the rosary because this is the arrangement of beads that's meant for praying the rosary. It's the same way that band-aid became the generic term for anything that you stick on yourself. And if you wrap it around you, it's a bandage. It's the same thing. Band-aid, and then you have bandage. Now, I should mention, because this gets tricky, okay? This is also a rosary. This is a 1 decade rosary. That's because this has all of the things that you need to pray 1 decade of the rosary. You have a cross, you have an Our Father, and you have 10 beads. Now, notice there's no drop. That's because the drop, remember, is not officially part of the rosary. So if you're just praying 10 decades, this is your boy. So you've got the cross for the creed, this very pretty Potter for the Our Father. Then you've got 10 Hail Marys, and then you've got a medal at the end. So theoretically, you could actually pray. Well, it's 10, right? So you can multiply tens forever. Well, you can multiply any number forever, but you know what I mean. You can go like 10, 10, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, as many as you like. And it takes, I don't know, like about 2 minutes to pray one decade of the rosary. Like when people are always say, I will pray an entire decade of the rosary for you. I'm kind of like, somebody needs to just sit and hold some beads for a while, because meditation is good for you. Now, this is a rosary, but this is probably the type of rosary that people are most likely to have on their person, because again, it's easy to fit in your pocket. Generally, they're small, they're a little bit more robust when they're short. And, if something happens to it, it's probably not particularly expensive. Now, the only thing that I have to add though is that like all of these are considered chaplets. Like chaplet is the generic term. And you have different kinds of chaplets. Now, the simplest chaplet will actually be just a 1 decade rosary, which is sometimes called the tenor. And the tenor will be the tenor, a lot of times, particularly if there's a saint that somebody wants to ask for the prayers of, they will choose, like, for example, this is Saint Agnes. St. Agnes is having a moment right now, which is for pretty obvious reasons. I will be making a video talking about that in more detail and what it means when a saint has a moment. But it's enough to know that St. Agnes, well, just Google her story, and then you will see the parallels to our current time when, there are vulnerable young girls who are being pushed into situations that they don't want to be in and we don't want them to be in. And you know what? Agnes has been in heaven for a long time, and that little lamb she's holding is believed to be her holding Jesus, because apparently somebody saw that in a vision after she'd been martyred. So, maybe you don't want to mess with a 13-year-old girl who has God on her side, because, if you're Christian, you believe that eventually you're going to have to face God. Just saying. Sometimes it's useful to have people think twice about things, because honestly, that's why the Reddit Ask Me Anything or Am I the Asshole forum exists, right? Because you kind of just need a vibe check. You need a vote, right? Like, hey guys, did I behave appropriately? Well, the Catholic Church has a whole like series, has like books and pamphlets and activities that will help you know that. And that's one of the things that praying with the saints and the martyrs and all that kind of stuff actually does, is it kind of gives you a standard for like, okay, there's a persecution going on. What should I be doing? I don't know. Well, what did Agnes do? Well, who was Agnes? Oh, she was this 13-year-old girl, right? So immediately, my bar as a grown woman for, is it acceptable to compromise? At what point would it have been acceptable to compromise? And keep in mind, we believe Agnes was a person who had almost no agency, who used every bit of agency she had to become a martyr and to become a saint. So, and I know I keep bringing up saints a lot. It's just that's kind of an important part of Catholicism that I think people just don't understand, because we're all still kind of, at the heh heh, you guys worship the Virgin Mary, no, we don't stage, which is the random childish mockery, does not make for good discourse. And I try hard not to engage in that. So we have this, which is a chaplet. Again, chaplet is the generic term. So this is also a chaplet. Now you may be asking yourself, what is that? Because it has a drop. And that's because people will design chaplets a lot of times to be like mini rosaries. When I say designed, what do I mean? Okay, so we have one bead, two beads, right? That's the drop. And then you have one, oh, sorry, I didn't hold up. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's because this is not a rosary, this is a chaplet. Now, this particular chaplet is a chaplet of Saint Dymphna, who is the patron saint of people suffering from mental illness. And the I and when I say suffering from mental illness, I mean people who are people who are experiencing some sort of a mental health crisis or just ongoing issues with their mental health, who are suffering because of that, right? We're not talking about, oh, people who are kind of crazy, they're a little bit weird. No, we're talking about people who it's like, I am suffering because of my mental health. And I'm going to ask Dymphna to do me a solid, which I've heard worse ideas. Yes, you should also get therapy and medication if possible, but meditating on Dymphna doesn't hurt either. So you're going to say an entirely different set of prayers on this one. Now, this one is bigger, which is what this is bigger, bolder, and butcher, which is why I've got it. This is a really unique item. This is a brand new type of chaplet. This chaplet is specifically, so like somebody made up Dymphna, somebody made up this one too. See, this is Carlo Acutis, who died of leukemia at the age of 13, or sorry, not 13, 15. He died of leukemia at the age of 15 and very quickly became a saint. He was canonized in 2025, and he's the patron saint of the internet. Well, one of them he shares with Isidore. He's the patron saint of the internet, and is obviously sharing patron saint of cosplayer duties with Teresa Lasso, because, we've got a picture of Therese dressed as Joan of Arc, but have you considered that we also have a picture of Carlo dressed as Spider-Man? Clearly, these are the important theological issues of our time, and I know that's why you come to Nerd Church. So this chaplet was made up, and I mean like created as a work of art. Well, not really a work of art, more like a hobby craft by someone who had a really profound devotion to Carlo Acutis. And I should say right now that she's me. So this chaplet was submitted for approval by Bishop Dolan. And Bishop Dolan, not Cardinal Dolan. This is Bishop John Dolan, whose place of work is St. Simon and Jude Cathedral. Okay, so he said, yeah, that sounds good to me, because you can, when you need to ask Carlo for help, you pray for help right here, and then you pray, you have the Apostles' Creed on the cross, 5 Our Fathers, 5 Hail Marys, and 5 Glory Bees. And if you are the Diocese of Phoenix and you have a devotion to Carlo Acutis, you can pray to him using that devotion, and maybe it'll spread elsewhere. I don't know. But so that's kind of what's going on with rosaries and chaplets. So you can see, like, people are creating new ones, people are expanding on existing ones. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on here. And the good thing is that you can generally keep your rosary practice from hitting enshittification by deciding, okay, I'm going to pray it the Dominican way. So I'm going to pray it the old school way, where you start with the Our Father and keep going. I'm going to pray the whole thing, and I'm going to use the Glory Be and the Fatima prayer, what have you, right? There's a whole range of practices that you can do with the rosary. But the thing is that none of these other chaplets, sometimes, because, sometimes you think, okay, well, that chaplet's just too specific, but there really haven't been any chaplets that have like caught fire until the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Now, the Divine Mercy, what is it? Divine Mercy is technically an image of Jesus that was painted based on the inspiration of Saint Faustina Kowalska. This is a picture of the cover of the print of the English translation of her diary. And she was a Polish mystic and visionary who was working in Poland in the latter part of, I'm sorry, in the first half of the 20th century. And she, passed away, and her chaplet became popular. And I think that's in large part because the chaplet that she came up with did two important things. One, it gave people a series of meditations that they could pray while thinking about Jesus, like just as Jesus, right? But it didn't create distance because it drew people closer to Jesus. And the reason for that is in part because you pray it on a normal rosary. So how does it work? Okay, I'm going to hold the beads up and I'm going to tell you the name of the prayers. And I'm probably going to say the prayers once because some of them are very short. Okay, so one would start by making the sign of the cross. We all know what that looks like. And then someone might say an optional opening prayer. And then the person would pray the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Glory Be. And then on the Pater, which is the big one, they would say, Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in atonement for our sins and those of the whole world. Then you would start here. So you'd pray your 10 Hail Mary, your 10, or rather the 10 Aves, right? Because on these beads, you're going to say, for the sake of the sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of the sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. And you're going to keep going that around. And then when you hit that guy, it's an Eternal Father, and you just keep going. And that is how you pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And as you can see, it doesn't require a lot of merch. It doesn't require a lot of stuff. The art potential is real. What's the problem? Well, there's two problems. One, the Divine Mercy displaced what was added to the calendar, replacing what in England had been called Low Sunday. Well, now it's Divine Mercy Sunday. When that happened, that sort of cemented a whole bunch of people who didn't really like the chaplet anyway. And then they were like, okay, like you're replacing holidays. This is that. What, up is down, black is white, good is bad. What's going on here? The other thing is that the Divine Mercy Chaplet, as you can tell by the prayers, is very, very focused on God's mercy. Excuse me, God's mercy and God's love. And I don't know why. Some people have a problem with that. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, which is the visions themselves. Now, this is the official English translation. Faustina's notebooks have a very complicated history, which honestly has not been written about in English. I am given to understand by a good friend of mine who I consulted on this, who can read Polish, that essentially the manuscript, the history of this manuscript is literally so complicated that even though we're pretty sure that the original or part of the original still survives, we don't actually know what it said exactly, because there was a period of basically taking various, because she kept her diary in like spiral bound notebooks. So it was kind of a matter of putting notebooks together, trying to put things into coherent order, all that kind of stuff. Um, and there is an argument made that basically this was the ravings of a mad woman, and that this priest just kind of like massaged it into something coherent. Um, I don't think that that was the case. The reason I don't think that was the case is because I've read the work of a scholar named Caroline Bynum, who her seminal work, or rather, her book that everyone has heard of is Holy Anorexia. The one you actually want to read, if you're going to read one Caroline Bynum book, and keep in mind, you should read all of them, but the one you actually want to read is Holy Feast, Holy Fast, because that one is about the experience of women religious who were having all of these struggles around receiving the Eucharist, because that was restricted in convents in very specific ways at that time. That's the one where um, she makes the essential connection when she says that men provide food, women are food. And there's a lot of really cool stuff there about like the feminization of Jesus in the Middle Ages. This book will open up your mind so much. But the point is that Faustina's visions, Sister Faustina, Saint Faustina's visions, fit so perfectly into this like weird underground sort of, we are in love with Jesus, kind of Marian quasi-apocalyptic moment. I don't know. Like we're kind of getting into the area where I'm never quite sure how much I should explain and how much I should just let ride, because honestly, I know that I'm trying to explain things to people that either they already know that from their own experience, or I am talking about things that just don't make any sense. So I tend to over explain, but I over explain a lot. Oh, this is the other thing I should have mentioned. How do people know about stuff like the Divine Mercy Chaplet? Well, in general, you have pamphlets and holy cards. So this one has the same nice little picture of Faustina. You open it up, it tells you if you want to pray it as a novena, which is a series of 9 prayers. So you have your entire plan. Any prayers that you don't already know will generally be printed in something like this. And then, of course, there's sort of the anatomical sketch of the rosary and what you pray on each prayer. Now, basically, so Faustina's diary. There is a huge issue just with not so much the provenance of the manuscript as it is like the idea behind the manuscript, right? The fact that she had this sort of difficult life. At one point, parts of the manuscript were burned and all this kind of thing, and then things were reconstructed. So it had kind of a sketchy manuscript history. And plus, she was having these really intense, really physical visions, which I'll come to in a second. And then there was just the fact that after World War II, it wasn't really possible to get documents in and out of Poland very easily. So what was initially sent to Rome was a highly incomplete Polish translation into Italian. And the narrative that most people agree on, although no one who doesn't like it will really agree that this was the actual motive, but I don't know. All I know is that the dates line up. So in this case, what happened was you got this situation where you have this nun has had all these visions. She's been given the words for this prayer. People think the prayer kind of slaps. What do we do? Right? Well, what they did was they they translated into Italian as best as they could and sent it to the Vatican, and the Vatican suppressed it. They were like, no, don't do this devotion anymore. It's no good. Why did that happen? Well, according to the Marian fathers and the people who like the chaplet, Mary, I'm sorry, not Mary, Sister Faustina, has this vision. She gets the prayer, she writes it down, it gets translated into Italian, and then they look at it and they're like, no, this is too weird. This is freaky. No. And I want to read to you a small excerpt from the diary. So this is written in 1925. This is Warsaw 1925, right? Then I heard these words: go at once to Warsaw. You will enter a convent there. I arose from prayer, came home, took care of things that needed to be settled. At best, I confided to my sister what took place within my soul. I tried to say goodbye with but our parents, and thus with my one dress and no other belongings, I left Warsaw. Okay, so then we get to something like this. Okay, so this is this is a vision she's having. Once I saw a big crowd of people in our chapel in front of the chapel and on the street because there was no room for them inside. The chapel was decorated for a feast. There were a lot of clergy near the altar, and then our sisters and those of many congregants. These were all waiting on the person who was to take a place on the altar. Suddenly I heard a voice saying I was to take the place on the altar. But as soon as I left the corridor to get to the yard and enter the chapel, the voice that was calling me, all the people began to throw at me whatever they had to hand: mud, stones, brooms, and other such, to an extent that I first hesitated to move forward. But they kept bravely, but the voice kept on calling me but the voice kept on calling me even more earnestly, so I walked on bravely. When I entered the chapel, the superiors, the sisters, and the students, and even my students, started to hit me with whatever they could, whether I wanted it or not. Quickly, I took my place on the altar. Well, the thing is like that all sounds like she's equating herself to Jesus, right? Because she's being taken to the altar, she's being sacrificed. But you also have to understand that Catholic saints will have their remains will be put in or under an altar to save it. So it's also possible that what Faustina was picturing was actually being a saint, being in the altar while the Mass is being celebrated. I don't know. It's an interesting possibility. And it's one that to me is personally a lot more interesting than like, is this real? Yes or no? But there you go. I don't know. I literally don't know what else to say about that. And so then what happened, right? So this gets suppressed, maybe for good reasons, maybe for bad reasons. I think it has a lot to do with how high your tolerance for weird is, if I'm going to be honest. And then, and then, and then John Paul II becomes Pope. And John Paul II was probably one of the few people who had the language skills to evaluate the Polish text and the Italian text. And he was like, this is no good. We need a new interpretation. So Joan Faustina, I'm sorry. There's a lot of names here and all blends together. So Sister Faustina, her diary still exists, and it's been assembled into, there's now like an official Polish manuscript. Well, Pope John Paul II takes the bad Italian diary, and John Paul is like, dude, read the translation, read the diary. These are not the same book. Let's do a new translation. And in the meantime, I'm going to authorize this as devotion. And that's what he did. So people kept praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet. Now, why did people keep praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet? Part of the reason is it's prayed on a regular rosary. No special equipment is required. Also, you can say the whole thing pretty close, like, I don't know, maybe 40, like maybe like 45 minutes. No, Jesus, I'm sorry. I am sleepy. I should be taking a nap. I ought to be taking a nap. But anyway, so it's not like 45 minutes. It's not even an hour. Like the Divine Mercy Chaplet is like 6 minutes and I timed it. So you can get all the way around. You've prayed the whole thing. It's like 6 minutes. You could even pray it another 10 times if you wanted to do a whole hour. But at the end of the day, you don't need special equipment. You can just pour it over your new equipment, your old equipment. Everything is fine. Everything is awesome. So that's kind of what is going on for the live stream. I will be posting at least one more video later today because I need to show you. I went to a Catholic supply store and I just kind of went to the St. Joseph section and went nuts. And I have a St. Joseph merch haul to show you because you know what? Obviously, if you can't know for sure what St. Joseph said, because he has these spoken words in the Bible, well, Catholics still figure something out to do with them, and the something that they figure out to do is kind of cool. So I hope you'll pop back and try looking for that video. In the meantime, have fun. Peace.